Hey guys, today I'm going to be reading some spooky stories from Jezebel. I really enjoy reading their stuff and I really hope you enjoy them as well. So grab whatever you need to get comfy. I got my snacks ready and let's get started. Alright guys, so the first story is called The Lady in the Bathroom. About 10 years ago, my 3-year-old son and I moved into a new house. Well, it was new to us, but it was actually a very old house. The inside of the house always seemed to be just a little darker and a little colder than it should be. I had noticed that the first time I went to view the house, but as it was summer, I figured it would save on cooling costs. Soon after we moved in, a friend of mine came by. We were sitting and talking for a few minutes, but she seemed uncomfortable the whole time. Then I saw in her face that something in the other room caught her attention. Her eyes got big and she said, "I have to go." I asked her what was wrong, but she said she didn't want to tell me. I kept after her because her reaction was kind of freaking me out. On her way out of the door, she finally said, "This house is haunted." But she wouldn't tell me what made her think so. Still to this day, 10 years later, she refuses to tell me what she saw. About a week after that night, my 3-year-old son casually asked me who the lady in the bathroom was. One day I was leaving for work, but once I got to the car, I realized I needed to run back into the house to get something. I walked into the house, and as soon as I got inside, this framed photo on the wall shot off the wall. Now, I don't mean it fell because of some issue with the nail or something like that. It shot horizontally away from the wall, not vertically down. And it landed on a mosaic table with enough force to break some of the tiles off of it. I felt like whatever was in the house was pissed that I came back in after it thought I had left for the day. After living in the house for about 6 months, I noticed a weird square cut into the boards on the deck. There was no handle, but I was able to pry it up. The hole was just big enough to fit through, and there was a ladder going down. For some reason, I went down and found myself in what looked like a homemade basement. It was basically just a room dug out of the earth. No constructed walls or stone supports or anything like you would expect it if it was a basement that was built with the house. It was very dark, but I could see over in the corner a suspicious looking large stone. It looked like one of those light-colored 100-plus-year-old headstones that you see in old cemeteries. Just then, some camel crickets started jumping at me, so I got my ass out of that basement as fast as I could and never went back. Now, this is the part that affected me the most and the reason we left the house. One night I was in bed, but not yet asleep, laying on my stomach. I heard someone walk into the room. I heard footsteps come from the doorway over to my bed. I didn't realize until later that the fact that I heard the footsteps was weird because the room was carpeted. When the footsteps reached my bed, I felt someone put their hands on my back. 2 hands just gently laid flat on my back and kept there. I assumed it was my son. I said, "What are you doing?" But no one answered. I looked up and no one was there. I got up and checked my son's bedroom and he was in bed asleep. We moved down soon after that. I would have moved out too because hell no. Just imagine you're falling asleep and you just feel 2 hands on your back and it was no one. I would have a heart attack. Alright, so the next story is called The Sibling. Nothing happened when I was younger, but it was in my early teens I started to notice weird occurrences, and since then I've read that it's common for things to start around teenage girls, adolescents. The very first thing happened my freshman year of high school when I had a sleepover and several girls brought cameras and took pictures. When they got their photos back, there were pictures in 2 separate rolls, which seemed to have wide vortex shapes swooping across me, obscuring my face and upper body. Immediately after this, an odd tapping began coming from my bedroom walls. At first, I thought nothing of it because it's obviously a very old house and they creak. But as soon as I heard it more frequently, I started realizing that it had some very strange characteristics. First of all, it only ever seemed to happen as I got into bed when I was in that receptive, almost asleep stage. I had my desk in there too, where I would spend many long hours doing homework, so I would have noticed if they had come at other times. Also, they alternated walls. They would rapidly switch from one wall to another, and sometimes they'd go simultaneously on two opposite walls, then switch suddenly to the other two opposite walls. Then something even more dramatic happened. In childhood and up until I was 17, I had bunk beds, which were actually great since I was always having friends spend the night. My house was where we all hung out due to size, location, and how well my parents got along with everyone. One night, I had just gone into bed on the top bunk, when suddenly the sheets were jerked sharply towards the wall, pulling partially off me. It was almost as if someone were in the bottom bunk, playing a trick on me or trying to get my attention. So that was very strange, but felt almost playful, so I didn't feel too scared by it, but it was very odd nonetheless. When I was 17, I got a new bed, so we started dismantling the bunk bed, and first gave away the top mattress to our neighbors who had a young son. So for a little while, I used the top bunk as a sort of shelf, but it still had the solid railing, so it was boxed in on all sides. One day, I had a pile of textbooks and magazines on the top bunk in some boxes I had sitting there, and was on the computer on the other side of the room typing something up. My back turned. Suddenly, there was a loud series of quick crashes, and I whirled around just in time to see my last textbook sliding over the side of the top bunk and cascade to the floor on top of the other books. Since the railing is about 10 inches high on all sides and the boxes were about the same and the pile was not that tall, they would have had to somehow jumped over both the side of the box and then the side of the bed. The creepiest experience was when my friend was spending the night and we were getting ready for bed, and my cat, who is the most docile, sweet, and gentle cat I've ever known, was curled up on my lap purring loudly. My friend switched off the light and he continued to purr warmly. But not 10 seconds later, he drastically changed on the turn of a dime. His body suddenly stiffened and all his fur rose up completely on end. He dug his claws deep into my thigh, enough to draw blood, and started to growl loudly. The growls quickly escalated into horrible piercing noises, like shrieks at the top of his lungs that I had never heard any cat make. The whole time, his entire body was rigid and tense also. Even aside from that, there was a general off feeling in the room, and my friend quickly rushed up to turn the light back on. Almost immediately, the claws pulled out of my skin and he relaxed and settled down, but still seemed unsettled. That only happened once in his whole life, but it remains extremely disconcerting to me to this day. Then last year, one of the strangest things yet happened to me. I was home from London on break, and though nothing of note had happened for years, that changed. I was alone because my parents were at work, but out of habit, I locked the bathroom door anyway when I went to take a shower. Nothing was noticeably amiss in there. Everything seemed in order. I laid my clothes down on the floor and stepped straight into the bathtub where I took a really long shower. After a long time, I opened the curtain back up and I immediately strongly felt like someone had been in there unnoticed while I was showering. But I checked the lock, which is an old-fashioned latch on the inside, and it was still fastened. I grabbed a towel, stepped out, and noticed something really strange. The bottle of baby powder, which we never use, is typically on the bottom shelf in a basket, was not only out, but lying open right in the very middle of the bathroom floor, with its contents scattered everywhere in the entrance area. Footsteps led through it and onto the dark yellow bath mat, stopping short of the tub. At first I thought, that's strange, I really don't remember it being there, but I guess I must have walked through it to get here. I was almost positive that it hadn't been there since it was so clearly right in the middle of where I would have walked, in such an obvious mess. But it was the only thing that I could think of as an explanation. But then I noticed that one of the footsteps was half on the mat, half on my jeans, and that there was another obvious footprint on my jean after that. Then I thought, though even more skeptically, that I must have stepped on my jeans somehow before getting in, even though I was convinced that I had stepped straight out of them and gone directly in. Still, it was the only explanation I can think of. However, when I looked more closely at the prints, I couldn't convince myself of anything. They were significantly smaller than mine, almost like a child's. After that day, and in retrospect, everything that happened almost seemed like something a child would do. They're all fairly playful, or something your younger sibling would do. I would have to agree. If there is a ghost, which I mean, it clearly sounds like there is, I definitely say that it's a child as well, which is still very creepy. Alright, guys, snack break. I apologize for the glare on my glasses. But I mean, there's nothing I can do about it because I really need him to be able to read the stories. Okay, so the next story is called "Then Why Were You Screaming?" And this one was actually submitted by a girl named Tara Babcock. The other two stories didn't say who submitted them. When I was 18, I lived with my now ex-boyfriend in a basement apartment in a town in Wyoming. It was not a happy time in my life for various reasons. Boyfriend was abusive, I was pregnant with his child, but it also didn't help that the apartment was creepy as shit. Even for a basement apartment, it was unusually dark and cold all the time. As soon as we moved in, weird shit started happening. Scratching noises would seem to be coming from inside the walls. I attributed this to mice, but not a single trap that was ever set caught one. I would be doing dishes in the kitchen and I would hear an enormous crash from the living room. It would sound so much like the TV had fallen over, taking my boyfriend's shelf of Star Wars memorabilia with it, that I would rush into the living room expecting to find a complete mess and not a thing would be out of place. Sometimes I would be coming down the dark, narrow hallway that connected the living room to the rest of the apartment, and I would swear that I heard whispering coming from the bathroom at the end of the hall. I would often wake up in the middle of the night after hearing something like a camera shutter clicking right in my ear. As unsettling as these things were, they didn't really disturb or frighten me so much as annoy and puzzle me. When I started finding out the history of the apartment from the locals and I had some context to put them in, that's when it got scary. A few months after we moved in, a guy from my hometown came to visit me. He was living in the same city at the time, attending the same college that my boyfriend was. He brought a friend with him who was local. I greeted the two of them outside the apartment, and the friend introduced himself and said that he used to know a guy who lived in these apartments. When I invited them inside and we went down to the basement apartment, the friend got a really weird look on his face. "This is the apartment the guy I knew lived in," he said. "Have you had any problems here?" I asked him what he meant, and he told me the guy he knew who had lived here had been a meth dealer and self-proclaimed Satanist who used to host weird group sex parties in the name of the Dark Lord or some shit. In any other town, this would be far-fetched, but this town was/is a very strange place. The friend said that the guy was now in prison for beating his girlfriend almost to death and pushing a TV over on top of her. Well, that spooked me. I told my boyfriend, who hadn't taken me seriously up until that point, and he, being a non-practicing Catholic, decided that calling a Catholic priest over to come bless the place was the best solution. I was/am not religious in the slightest, but I didn't have any better ideas, so we called the local parish and they sent an old priest over. He sprinkled some holy water around, said a few prayers in Latin, and was gone. Later that night, we were invited to a small gathering at our neighbor's apartment. He lived in the apartment directly above us, and we had told him earlier in the day about the priest coming over to bless the place because of the spooky shit that was going on. When we arrived at his apartment that evening, he asked us how it went. We shrugged and said fine. "Then why were you screaming?" he asked me. "Were you having devils cast out or something?" My boyfriend and I exchanged puzzled looks. I told him I hadn't been screaming, nobody had. The whole thing had been pretty uneventful. The neighbor swore up and down that he had heard a woman screaming coming from our apartment while the priest was there. He thought it was me being exorcised or something. WTF. I had hoped that was the end of it, but it wasn't. Things actually started to get worse over the next few months. The weird noises came more frequently. The camera shutter sound woke me up every night instead of just once in a while. My boyfriend began experiencing the phenomena as well. Around this time, the fights we were having started to escalate and my boyfriend became very violent. He had never been a nice guy exactly, but I had never thought he would actually hit me with closed fists, but he did, and quite often. It was a very bad time. Early one morning, I woke up suddenly and saw that my boyfriend was still asleep in the bed next to me. I looked away to check the clock, and when I looked back, he was staring at the ceiling with his eyes wide open. It startled me because I had never seen him wake up so suddenly. I said good morning and asked if he was okay. I spoke to it, he said. The thing that lives here, it told me I can't leave. It said it owns me now. I started to ask him what the hell he was talking about, but he immediately closed his eyes and went back to sleep. Somewhere deep down, I thought I knew what he was talking about, and that freaked me out even more. One night, a few weeks later, I was alone in the apartment. Boyfriend was out drinking with friends. I was watching Ace Ventura, Pet Detective on the TV in the living room. I had decided to go to the kitchen and get a drink. As I was walking down the long dark hallway to the kitchen, I stopped dead in my tracks. I had heard something growl. At first, I thought it must have been the TV, but as I strained to hear, the noise coming from the TV in the living room was Jim Carrey doing one of his voices. The growl came again, and it was coming from somewhere much closer and off to my right. I turned, I saw a dark shape crouching in the hallway. I had just enough time to wonder if a stray dog had somehow gone in when the thing stood up and rushed at me, gnarling. I fucking freaked. Bolted down the hallway, up the stairs, and out of the front door. The neighbor who lived above us wasn't at home, so I went up another flight of stairs and knocked on a different neighbor's door. The lady named Dawn, who lived in the apartment on the top floor, came to the door. I had not met her before this, but I immediately started babbling about the shadow thing in my apartment and begged her to come take a look. She and her significant other, who lived with her, accompanied me downstairs. There was nothing to see and nothing out of place, but the hallway was ice cold. I felt stupid and crazy and embarrassed, but Dawn told me she believed me. You know, this apartment is messed up, she said. Lots of crazy shit has gone on down here. I told her I had already heard about the Satanist dude who tried to murder his girlfriend. She laughed and said that was only one of the people who had lived there. Before that, a Mexican lady had lived there. She was a devout Catholic who did not speak a lot of English and had a life-size crucifix on the wall. Dawn had never seen anything like it outside of a church, and when she asked about it, the Mexican lady crossed herself and said that it was to keep the evil in the apartment at bay. Before that lady, the apartment had been rented by a photographer who used it as his darkroom. He was busted for kitty. My blood froze as I remembered the weird camera shutter noises that would wake me up. Dawn told me more about the history of the apartment and the people who had lived there, but I can't recall any of the other details. Just that each person had either been terrified of the place, been a terrible person, or met a terrible end. I moved out of the apartment and back in with my parents a few weeks later. I might have stayed longer if not for the fact that my boyfriend had become so violent during one of our fights that he threatened to kill me and then himself. Whether it was him finally showing his true colors or the evil in the apartment working on him, I'll probably never know. But I knew that my life and the life of my unborn child was in danger, so I got the fuck out of there and out of that relationship. Unborn child is 12 now. Abusive boyfriend is out of the picture and has been for over a decade. I am still very good friends with Dawn. Sometimes I still have dreams about that place though. The dreams are always terrifying, and sometimes I wake up in the dark, totally convinced for a few moments that I am back in the apartment. Wow. Well, for one, I am glad she left that abusive boyfriend of hers, because that's a no-no. And yeah, I'm glad she left the apartment, period, as well, because that is some really creepy shit. It's definitely not a friendly ghost if the priest went and things got worse. I do wonder what it was though, because it does seem like there was quite a few things going on there. And the fact that everyone knew that it was haunted, It just makes it creepier. Alright, you guys, so this last story is by Sorsha McNasty. We have never figured this out, and now the 3 living witnesses have to be good and fucking drunk to discuss the whole thing. I was 7, my brother 10, my mom in her early 40s, and my grandmother, her mom, in her 60s. So we were all cogent. No one was too young or too senile to not recall this nonsense, yet still no bloody answer. Grandma lived on an isolated country road in North Carolina that was named after her family since they were the only crazy fuckers who lived on the land for about 1,000 acres. And I do mean crazy. We have stories about relatives that start with, "You remember that time Uncle Bob was in the ditch with a shotgun?" Which time? Her house had been empty for several weeks while she'd been visiting us in Florida, but we were all back spending the weekend with her before trekking back to the Sunshine State. The house is in the for real country, literally over train tracks, past the salvage yard, and her nearest neighbor, a cousin. Everyone is related to everyone who owns a house on the road. Isn't within screaming distance. Yes, that seems to be a real system of measurement. Screaming distance. It's early in the AM, just before daybreak. We're awake because these are farm freaks who wake at the crack of dawn from sheer ingrained habit. We're eating cereal when we hear someone pull up outside. Curious, we all run to the big picture window that looks onto the front yard. There is a strange truck there. No one seems to be behind the wheel, though the engine is idling. The truck is, well, old for one thing. It's old-timey, like from maybe the 1930s. You could picture the Jode family heading to California in this thing. It's rusted, but it was probably once painted blue. We stare at the thing, bewildered. Mom asks Grandma if she knows who that is. Nope, not a clue, says Grandma. She runs to get the phone to call her cousin and ask him to come up. She thinks maybe it's a hired hand and he's just at the wrong farm. Just as she asks him to come on down, the phone goes dead. Well, that's unsettling. All at once, there is a loud, insistent banging on the front door. We all scream. My grandma, who is terrifyingly resourceful, huddles us all into the living room, away from a window where anyone can see us. Then, while Mom, me, and my brother tremble there on the couch, she grabs a serrated bread knife from the kitchen and cautiously approaches the front door. She peeks out a side window, very stealthily. She turns back to us and looks confused. She shakes her head like no one is there. We all kind of breathe easier. Then every door in the house is banging relentlessly. I can still hear it, rhythmic and terrifying, like all the doors are about to splinter and crack. There were 2 doors in the basement beneath us, so the sound is also a reverberation at our feet. The 3 ground floor doors are shaking. We can see them trembling and jerking on their hinges from our vantage point on the couch. Finally, Mom runs to the window, either from a psychotic break with reality or terror, I have no clue. She cries, "Oh, thank Christ, cousin is here." We run to her and peek out the picture window. There is no one that we can see in the yard, but we can see all the doors from our viewpoint. Cousin walks by the truck with a shotgun in his hand. Cousin, it should be noted, has pretty much every gun ever made. He looks puzzled, looking at the rear of the truck. Then he glances into the cab window and he stops. He goes pale, runs a hand down his face, then he runs towards the house, towards us. My grandmother flings open the kitchen door as she sees him coming. He shouts, "Everyone, get behind the couch, get down." He runs past us as we bolt for the couch. The banging starts again, all the doors, and now we can hear the windows rattle. It's like a tornado or the end of the world. We are too scared to even scream. Cousin flings open the front door and fires the huge shotgun once. Bang. Deafening. As he does, the truck roars into life and it sounds like a train. We scramble up, the banging stops, mercifully. Cousin is advancing onto the lawn, gun leveled at the truck. We run behind him, wanted to be out of that shaking, quivering house and near the dude with the gun. The truck peels out backwards, cutting across the yard and racing into a breakneck speed. Tires squeal, rubber is burnt, cousin fires again, and we all cower behind him. He blows out the back window with the sound of 1,000 plates smashing into linoleum, but the truck never even hiccups, just roars down the road. No tags, not even a vanity plate on the back. There was no one behind the wheel of that thing. We all had a clear view. Everyone agreed, not a driver in the cab. Well, not anything we could see anyhow. The police were called, the phone line had been cut, there was not a single boot print in the entire yard except Cousin's, from where he'd run into and out of the house. Cousin had reported there had been no plate, but when he looked into the cab, it looked like something from a horror movie. He said there were all kinds of weird restraints, handcuffs, C-clamps, nylon straps, and he said the floorboards looked covered in what smelled like blood to him. Cousin was famous for his keen sense of smell, and the window was down, so it's possible. Cousin said he thought he saw a blur of something out of the picture window and ran to fire the first shot, but missed because once he stood there, nothing or no one was on the lawn or in the truck. Then it shot backwards out of the yard and out of our lives, leaving no answers, just a deep sense of unease every time we'd visit. Grandma and cousin have passed, deeply religious people. They stuck by their unchanged versions of the story until they died. My brother, mother, and I have never been able to figure it out. Neither did the cops. We don't know how all the windows and doors were banging, and we don't know why we never saw a soul anywhere or how they could get around the sides of the house without leaving a trace in the damp earth. That's definitely very weird that nobody saw anyone, yet everyone heard the exact same thing. I don't even know what's creepier, not seeing anything or actually seeing something. I'm glad everyone was okay though. I'm glad nothing happened to anyone. Alright you guys, so there you have it. These are all the stories for today. I really hope that you enjoyed them, and I will see you next time. Bye.